Okay, I think we'll get started now. Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you all. Thank you for joining us very much for this Detactics webinar on the topic of entity resolution or single view of X. We'll be talking about data quality and data matching, which will be unsurprising. So let me move on to the next slide, and I'll begin by introducing myself and my colleagues. So to those of you who don't know me, my name is Tom Carroll. I look after business development at Detactics. Those of you who do know me, keep stump. I'm joined by two of my colleagues. First of all, we have Alex Brown. Alex is our data matching product owner. Alex oversees the roadmap and development of our data matching capabilities. He works closely with some of our strategic clients that use the Detactics platform to perform entity resolution. Alex, good to have you. We also have Sean McConnell. Sean is our GovTech pre-sales lead. Sean works hand in hand with government clients at Detactics across local authorities, healthcare organisations and police forces. I think it's fair to say Sean has dealt with all the complex challenges of duplicate citizen data many times in his years at Detactics. So Sean, a pleasure to have you too. So in the space that we are in of data management and data governance, the phrase single view is used a lot. Whether it's single view of customer, single view of citizen, single view of supplier, or anything else. Today, we're going to unpack that topic, ask what that really means, talk about why it's a difficult thing to solve, and how organizations can approach it in a practical way with some examples from Alex and Sean. So we'll spend the first 30 minutes discussing the problem, talking through some examples, and then we'll leave around 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. Anybody who needs to drop or join late, whatever else, no problem. The webinar is being recorded and will be published online afterwards. So let's get started. Detactics hasn't done a webinar of this nature for some time, so in the interest of making introductions, we are a software company specializing in data quality and data matching software. We operate out of Belfast, if you can't tell from my accent, and we've been in the space for many years, serving clients internationally in financial services and government. Our platform is used by several large organizations in finance and public sector to handle large volumes of data, critical data. They leverage our capabilities and our automation to solve complex technical and business process challenges around accuracy, timeliness, consistency of data. This is done through the platform's capabilities for profiling, detecting outliers, and then executing those sophisticated data quality and matching checks to resolve issues. So you see on the right-hand side, the use cases are varied. This is not an exhaustive list, but it stems all the way from financial services, deposit guarantee regulations, all the way to the complexities of crime classification, dealing with messy crime records and information in the public sector. So this is just quickly tapping on our mission statement as a company. We are a software business, but our goal is really about making data trustworthy and actionable for business users. So non-technical people that want to analyze data, improve its quality. Ultimately, clean, deduplicated data is what underpins their business, and we want them to focus on that and not be worrying about data. So the question for today is, what is entity resolution? It's not a question I'm going to answer in one fell swoop. I'll be working with my colleagues, but you'll have heard some of these terms on screen, things like record linkage, single source of truth, golden record. On the surface, these are sort of vague jargon industry terms, but the definition of entity resolution is seen on screen. It's the process of identifying one or more records that refer to the same real-world entity, even when those records contain variations and come from multiple sources of data. So the entity could be a person, could be a company, a counterparty, a product, really anything that's critical to the business. And the challenge is that that data is spread across multiple systems, business applications and sources. A customer's information could be captured in 5 systems with many differences and variations. It could be Tom Carroll, could be Thomas Carroll at different addresses and different information. The same thing's true of a citizen, a product, or any other entity. So the question for businesses is, do these records refer to the same thing? It sounds like a simple question, but it actually becomes technically difficult very quickly. And then firms face all of the operational questions around how confident they are in a match, who reviews possible matched records, what's the audit trail, and can we explain match decisions? So why does this matter? Everyone on the call who works in financial services or government or truthfully any other industry will know all organizations depend absolutely on accurate information. Duplicates lead to errors, inefficiencies, and risks. And we're seeing more and more with financial regulations and governmental regulations in healthcare, for example, that firms are demanded to have a single view of critical data, whether it's a customer, a counterparty, or a patient. And you can imagine all of the risks of getting that wrong. The cost of non-compliance is huge. So having a single view is the foundation. This then unlocks insights that are otherwise not visible. So with that context, I want to bring Alex Brown into the discussion. Alex, from a financial services perspective, where do we see the challenges of entity resolution, and how have we approached solving this with some of our clients?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so I think perhaps I suppose if we're looking specifically at the single view example, the most obvious example is probably in the single view of customer, which is probably the most common example across all industries. So in financial services, you've got banks, wealth managers, insurers, asset managers, often holding large volumes of customer or client data across multiple systems. And that might include, core banking platforms, CRMs, onboarding systems, KYC risk platforms, product systems, or even things like marketing databases. Operationally, they just may have all of these different systems anyway. But when you consider that many of these firms have gone through, several mergers and acquisitions, they've accumulated all the siloed information along the way. And I think siloed data has been the bane of the data industry for a great many years now. In many cases, it's absolutely required. In some cases, operationally, it's maybe a little bit of an expensive problem to solve, but ultimately the underlying problem is still the same. You have this challenge that no single system always holds the full truth, and the same customer in this case can be represented in different formats in multiple systems. So there might be a Alex Brown in one database, a Brown in another, and Alexander Brown in another one, just as you said. And perhaps a really good example of this from the data tactics perspective, where we've got a lot of experiences in regulations such as deposit guarantee schemes. So like in the UK, the FSCS regulation, the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. And what this regulation means is that financial institutions that hold client money have an obligation to be able to consolidate customer account data from multiple banking systems and report all that information to the regulator. So this usually, pretty much always involves matching customer account information from multiple systems. So like, for example, current accounts, instant access accounts, ISA accounts, etc., to create a single view of that customer that consolidates all the account balance and deposit information for each customer, so that the total guarantee exposure can be calculated. So the challenge here is you've got account names that can be different. I mean, I know I've personally got account names as Alex Brown, Mr. A Brown, Alexander Brown. So there's basic formatting differences there when you're trying to link accounts. Name changes are really common. So when people get married, they often change the name or change the name for other reasons, and those changes don't always get reflected immediately in every single system. So you can have quite significant differences in names. Address details obviously can be very messy and can differ greatly between systems. And when people move house, the address changes almost completely. So and it takes a while for those changes to get reflected in these systems. So that's the kind of like data that you're dealing with. And you've got to, these firms have to report all of this stuff within 24 hours of requests from the regulator. So what we do at Data Tactics is we generate that single view of customer, but we also do like a data readiness pre-validation to ensure that the reports that we get out of that will also meet the regulatory requirements and will be accepted as well. But I think I'd also like to point out that matching isn't just restricted to the single view use case like FSCS. I mean, if you take like the regulations like BCBS 239 was an obvious example that we did a lot of work with a few years ago, where firms had basically had to ensure that all their counterparty data, that they had an LEI for it. So that meant matching corporate entity names and addresses to the GLIFE database in order to resolve those counterparties to an LEI for regulatory reporting. So again, that's complex matching of large volumes of messy data. And then aside from regulation, this accurate, good quality matching is critical in data management and data distribution. So, for example, we're working with a leading European stock exchange and data vendor to build out a matching platform that covers all kinds of data domains. It covers corporate entities, it covers people such as officers, directors, persons of significant control, and also financial instruments, interestingly, as well. So, it's all of this is to internally improve data quality in their systems so that they can onboard either a new officer or director or a new company, new financial instrument into a system and be sort of like have very good confidence that that instrument or company hasn't already been onboarded, so duplicate detection, and they can also do good root cause analysis. So if something needs to be updated or modified, they can find that piece of data really quickly. So it also reduces operational costs. But what I think is also interesting is it makes it easier to monetize their data because it simplifies the distribution. So it means that their clients can more easily link the vendor's reference data to their own data. So essentially the client can find the correct corresponding vendor data that corresponds to their data, and then therefore they can unlock much greater value from their own data.
Brilliant. I think, Alex, now maybe you're going to talk through a sort of a worked example of this challenge.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm very much aware that we may be teaching grandmas to suck eggs here with the kind of like reasonably technical audience that we often get at Data Tactics. But just to reiterate the challenge that we're faced with in a more graphical kind of way, we've got data in different systems represented in different ways, and this might be different numbers of fields, different field names, but I mean the really difficult stuff is where you get different field types and formats. So there may be a great many number of systems involved. Here we've pictured like 2 in this little graphic, but with mergers and acquisitions, it's not uncommon for there to be many more source systems. And you can't really just do one-to-one matching between fields because very often the fields won't align between one system and another. You'll have to do some sort of like mapping or normalization. And when it actually comes down to the data content within those fields, you'll find that you can't just match the content exactly. So it's very hard to do all this stuff in SQL, for example, because you need to account for differences in the content. So whether that's spelling or typos, or just things being represented differently. So, for example, in this graphic here, you've got maybe different formats for date of birth, different formats for names, address details. One system it's got address line 1, address line 2, city and postcode. The other system doesn't. It's just got an address field and a postcode field. So that's the kind of thing you've got to account for. and you've also got to account for incomplete data. So not just fields that exist in one system but not in another, but sparsely populated fields. Yeah. So what do you do if one record has data has a data field populated and the other one doesn't? How does that contribute to the match score? Does it make sense to even compare these fields? Should we be profiling the data before you do that so you can work out which fields are actually best for the matching? Some fields will have a different weight, so it should lend a different weight to the matching. Um, yeah, so there's all of those things to consider. So if you're just wanting to merge two records or just link them together, your platform has to have some built-in data quality and or error tolerance within it. Yeah, and most matching platforms will have some sort of error tolerance, definitely. But I think with Datactics, one of the great things is you get, obviously we do a lot of data quality, so we often build in data quality pipelines into the matching as well. But perhaps one of the most significant things is this all needs to be configurable by subject matter experts, so non-technical people that who understand the data and the business case, because these can change quite frequently. As in, one day you might be building a matching platform for one use case and then another one. So, for example, if you're just simply linking, wanting to build a matching platform that links records, and then another day you're looking at trying to understand how to build something that's more aligned towards KYC or screening. You might intentionally have to have different matching characteristics between those systems. So, for example, you might have they might have different precision and recall. So a KYC or sanction screening thing might have higher recall so that you don't miss potential medium confidence matches that could potentially be a sanctioned individual, but you wouldn't necessarily want that for record linking. So the configuration, kind of needs to be easy to change, and ideally is in the hands of subject matter experts rather than technical development staff. And I think explainability is really the key here as well. So the matching process, as well as generating things like match scores, it can also generate metadata that describes why a match was made. And this is obviously really important for things like KYC screening as well. But it's something that is getting a lot more easy to implement and can just be part of routine metadata that's part of the exhaust of the matching process. And then I suppose finally, ideally you want everything to be fully automated. I think in Datactics we've got this phrase, do data. We want just everything to be done at the push of a button, or even better, just happens automatically. And I think everything does need to be automated as much as possible. And I think for matching, what this really means is that those edge cases, the ambiguous matches that need human review, that's typically where all the sort of the manpower gets spent, is reviewing those. So your matching process needs to be able to measure and minimize those ambiguous matches as much as possible.
I think what you've said there, Alex, is really, really interesting, and I'm just wondering, on that point of what you've shown here is matching is made more possible when the records are sort of equally complete, so there's more information upon which you can infer a match. When we're doing things like creating match scores or match confidence, is the recommendation to sort of hone in on which attributes are the most valuable in the matching process, things like unique identifiers versus things that can be common? For example, many people could have the same date of birth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You know that.
Yes. So I mean, what you've hit on there is that the way you tune it is specific to the data domain. So if you're looking at people data versus company data, you might have very different weights to the address information associated with that. Even though it's an address, you know, for a person and a company, you might choose to treat the weighting of the address differently. Yeah, absolutely. And it's something that also changes depending on the characteristics of the data. So the quality of the data, the quality of the address information, how well populated that address information is, that all impacts how much you should weight the those fields, how much weight those fields give to the match. Yeah.
I think you've covered there really nicely the sort of, in a simple example, the challenges of achieving a single view of customer. In a public sector context, maybe the terms around data matching and entity resolution change, or the subjects rather. Perhaps it's not a customer, but it's a citizen, and we're matching not from a core banking platform, but from a taxpayer system or a healthcare system. Sean, that's where I'll bring you into the fold. What are your views on entity resolution for the government and public sector?
Thanks, Tom. You're right, the terminology may change, but ultimately the underlying data challenge is familiar, or regardless of whether we're looking across citizens, households, properties, organizations, assets. In government and public sector, the single view of X might mean a single view of many things. For example, a local authority, they may hold data around what citizens exist across housing, education, and other areas. Each system where they may have stored this data may have been procured across different times, configured differently, and designed for a multitude of different purposes. And over time, these original intentions may diverge. The data might be useful, might be relevant within the confines of each of these individual systems, but it may become different over time to reconcile those data within those individual systems with each other. So that in itself has the potential for creating duplication, fragmentation. For example, a citizen, in the case of a local authority, may appear multiple times with different names, similar to the example that Alex has just shown. They may be linked across multiple different addresses. People move house, people get married, and there are lots of problems simply with data being entered in the wrong way in the first place. A household may be represented differently across these different systems, and where you may have examples where, for example, national systems and national identifiers are used across one, another system may have similar or the same information where it's not using something as standardized. So a vulnerability flag, for example, where we're looking at vulnerable individuals stored in council systems, may be visible in one, but might not be in another. And these are the sort of challenges that we've undertaken with our clients across many different kind of public sectors across the years. The result is that public sector employees often spend a lot of time manually checking, manually cleansing, reconciling, and interpreting data. We see this a lot across our policing clients, where there's a huge time and resource burden placed upon analysts and engineers within these individual organizations, and it has real consequences. It slows down service delivery, it makes reporting harder, and introduces issues further on down the pipeline potentially. And of course, it creates duplication. The work is duplicated, the records are duplicated, risks can be obscured if there's not a clear view of those individuals, those households, those citizens, organizations, suppliers, whatever it may be across those different data domains. And it prevents organizations from seeing the full picture. With regards to industries like policing or healthcare, the consequences there can be significant. For central government, healthcare, pensions, and specifically when we're talking about crime, these challenges can become very complex because of the sensitivity of the data and the operational importance of getting things right. And that is a key battle that we see these organizations facing. And there's a balance between getting the data right, but also including processes that are consistent, manageable, and maintainable over time. So if, for example, we're looking at policing, a single view of a suspect or a victim is extremely valuable, but it has to be done responsibly. Public sector organizations need strong governance, they need this transparency, and they need control of the data. There's a key need to understand how data is managed, how it gets matched, how it links to each other, and why there are links, why there are exceptions, and how these things can be limited and managed going forward. That's where data matching and entity resolution become more than just a technical exercise. There's more at stake here, and they become foundations for really good public service delivery.
Thank you, Sean. That's excellent. And I think you touched on a couple of examples there of work that Detactics has done in the past, for example, with procurement arm of the UK National Health Service or with the local authority around identifying vulnerable citizens, where the impacts of data matching and entity resolution are real world and are huge. But you've highlighted another challenge there, which is the public sector is essentially constrained by personnel limitations, resources, and there obviously then are risks. There's an opportunity to introduce things like automation, but do you think the best approach is to kind of blend technologies and engines for automating data matching with the subject matter expertise of people like you've mentioned, who've worked in policing for many years or worked in local authorities, and they really understand the systems and what good looks like?
Very much so. It's essential really to combine the expertise of these individuals with the expertise and the tools of subject matter experts such as the data analyst and engineer. The reality is that it is an art that requires the input from multiple different directions. These people, we're looking at things like talking about crime registrars or analysts who are focusing on things like crime data, citizen data, vulnerable individuals. They have an insight into how these things need to be done, and providing the tools to enable them to do it correctly, to get from point A to point B, where they're working with this cleansed, correct data that gives them the visibility to be able to then achieve what's required within society, is the challenge that we work with them on. And it's a battle to ensure that we get the balance correct.
Absolutely. I think you're right, Sean, that the single view allows firms and organizations to make better decisions, but also identify gaps, things like potential fraud as well. And that brings us to another interesting topic, I think, before we move on to the Q&A section of the webinar, which is about AI, artificial intelligence. And the question for both you and Alex really is, what's your view on this? Where can it help? Obviously, AI introduces opportunities around potential for greater speed, intelligence, hopefully accuracy, but it also introduces some risks. Firms can be hesitant about adopting novel technologies, and AI is sort of lots of power and opportunity, but there's some risk of things like hallucination, and we've seen lots of high-profile examples of that. So I guess starting with you, Alex, in financial services, where do you think AI can help sort of bolster efforts to perform single view or entity resolution? Alex, we're losing you, I'm afraid. Unless you've been taken over by AI, of course, and become a robot, which is how that's... There we go. We got you now. Go.
Am I still a robot? Or
no, we've got you now. Perfect.
Yay. Great. Thank you. Sorry, that's just to prove that I'm not actually an AI avatar. So I think that when we talk about AI, just being specific here, we're talking really about the large language models and agentic AI like Claude and Copilot, right? And so what's important to understand is that these large language models by themselves are not suitable for doing sort of like large scale enterprise data matching that we're kind of like talking about, right? I mean, yes, you could, if you've got a spreadsheet and you throw it at Claude, it's probably going to be able to match some of the records in that spreadsheet. Okay, but really what's going to happen is behind the scenes, it's going to probably create some bit of Python code that's going to install an external library that's going to do some sort of like, Levenstein edit distance fuzzy matching on it and and that Python code it won't really be a maintainable, easily configurable thing that that you can deploy production wide in an enterprise. So ultimately, what you're talking about is that you actually need a platform to do this kind of thing. To do matching, to do data quality and things like that can do all the heavy lifting, because you don't want to be the other thing is like token usage. You don't want to be wasting valuable tokens on just shipping data around, right? You want to be able to offload as much heavy lifting to a dedicated platform that does matching or data quality as possible, and then save the LLM resources for actual reasoning. Yeah. So for so I suppose in our case, this probably brings us to things like integration. And something we've done, for example, in Datactics, is we started building out MCP servers for our products. So we have an MCP server for data quality and one for the match engine. And what this does is it allows an agent like Claude to be able to communicate with the match engine or data quality platform and get information from it and do stuff with it. So at one time, I suppose we were saying, what can AI do for us? We've now turned that on its head. It's like, what can we do for AI? So we're basically enabling AI to use our tools. So it now means that we can get, an analyst can ask Claude, to go and perform some sort of task that requires some sort of like high speed, high quality matching on large data sets. Claude can integrate with our match engine and the back-end connected systems, get the information it needs, along with the explainability, metadata and things like that, to then be able to explain to the end user, oh yeah, this is the same as this matches this is what you're looking for. And if the end user says, well, how do you know that? And it can, Claude can then say, well, because here's all the explainability metrics here. So that's, something that we have in preview right now. We're still building it out, adding more features to it. But I think this, from our perspective, this is one of the key areas that we see the AI integration, and we're also, building out skills and plugins to be able to drive our platform more easily.
I think, Alex, you've made a really helpful distinction there, which is where even if you've used an agentic tool or an LLM to do analysis of data to detect matches and potential duplicates, if you're a large organization in financial services or government, you ultimately need still an engine or a platform that can persist the data, that can execute all of the sophisticated fuzzy matching rules and provide an audit trail. So you still kind of need an engine to be the powerhouse of your solution. And it's an interesting approach we've taken, I think, with using MCP to kind of put Datactics in service of AI, where it can be called in when there are matching requirements. Sean, I'm just wondering on your side from public sector and government, where we've seen lots of large initiatives recently in UK government around adoption of AI, where do you see this fitting in some of the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, I think the key thing for working with government is transparency. As with all other industries, there's a significant potential here for really great work, but there's also a huge requirement to use this responsibly. When we talk about looking at citizen data, specifically when it comes to vulnerable individuals who are in the care of an organization or department, healthcare data, or indeed victims of crime, things like explainability and governance are essential here. What we want to avoid is a solution, without even getting into the technical aspects of it, a solution that makes decisions where the rationale behind it is hidden or obscured, where nobody can explain why it's doing that. AI in a government perspective needs to support human decision making rather than replace it, and needs to help teams work more effectively, again, rather than doing the work for them. It is certainly a tool to augment existing processes rather than taking them over and doing it unsupervised. I think the strongest approach really is to combine things like automation, data quality, matching logic, as well as human review and carefully scripted and governed AI assistance into existing processes, because there is a huge amount of potential there. We just need to get it right.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you've both said is, if the underlying data is critical and it's of high quality, you can leverage sort of combined power of a platform that can do all of the execution and the matching and sort of the repeatable logic and audit trail. You can combine that with AI, and that allows firms to gain all of the operational efficiencies that come with that. It's a complex challenge, and I think we haven't quite cracked it. But we've covered a lot today in this session. I realize we're running a little bit short of time. We want to get into some Q&A. So while I wrap up what we've discussed today, I invite anyone in the audience to submit some questions into the Q&A or chat box, and hopefully I'll be able to find them on my screen that has about a million things popping up. But to quickly summarize what we've covered today, I think we started with first principles. What is entity resolution? How does that translate across financial services and government? We've agreed that it's really about identifying when you have one or more records that look different, that have been described differently, but refer to the same real world entity, like a customer, like a citizen, like a product, anything else. This challenge exists because most firms have multiple systems. They have places where they store data. They have business applications that process different activities like onboarding and offboarding. And in the public sector, many citizens and households' data will appear in multiple systems, whether it's in tax-paying systems, Meals on Wheels, healthcare systems, etc. So the same people or the same entities reside in systems that are disparate and disconnected. We've seen that in both sectors, and we know the challenges are many. But Alex and Sean, I think, have both talked about how we can use an approach of really understanding the data and its context and the ultimate use case, whether it's around single view of citizen to detect vulnerable people, or it's around sanction screening and anti-money laundering to detect fraudsters in a fin crime context. We can leverage automation to reduce manual effort, but we also need to have some kind of expert in the loop. And with automation, we sort of have that we're at the thin end of the wedge where it can do the heavy lifting, and we have subject matter experts ultimately sort of reviewing, making decisions on real critical things, and we can explain why we've matched records with different confidence levels. And with that, I think we'll move into the Q&A. As the questions are loading up on the screen here and I get my box open on Teams, I'll start with one question I think that's probably more for you, Alex, which is, in a financial services context, any firm wishing to implement an entity resolution platform for, let's say, single view of customer or single view of company, where should they start? Do they start with a really high value use case? Do they start with technology? What's your view?
Well, I think it's obviously really good to have a specific use case in mind and approach it tactically. So you've actually got a real use case, a real objective, and real data that you can start working on straight away. But I think what is crucial is that it doesn't become some sort of like tactical solution in its own box. Otherwise, a large organization can end up with having multiple matching platforms. And we've definitely seen this with our customers. They say, well, why do I need another matching platform? I've got the one that does this. But you find that they're not, that they tend to be written and dedicated to do one thing and one thing only. So ideally, what you want to do is, yes, have the objectives that you're going to address a specific tactical use case, but the way you do it is with a platform that is extensible across, can be applied to other use cases as well, so that you're then investing in one single platform rather than sort of like building countless individual platforms that just do their own thing.
Okay, thanks, Alex. There's another question that's come through here in the feed, which says, maybe this one for you, Sean, I think. With secure government data and the use of Claude or other AI tools, what checks can be made to ensure data is secure and not used to train an LLM?
Yeah, it's a great question. We have experience working with secure data for many years, typically around policing vulnerable people, the areas that I mentioned before. So security is often of paramount importance in general, not just with AI, but of course, in recent years with the increase in exposure to AI, various models, machine learning. There's an additional element to that security, which is exactly as posted here. How do we keep that data secure? And it seems like a timely question, considering we're seeing these repeated news articles around AI models reaching out and breaking into their competitors and things like that. So it's a real fear and it's a real concern. Typically, it's a question of making the environment secure. If we're working with, for example, police data, the models that we've typically worked with, and the models being the general security models, environments that are siloed, where there's no communication with the outside world.